Hi guys, it's Curtis here again from the Social Workplace podcast. And, you know, today we're looking at the topic of demographics, vulnerability, and the grooming gangs and that narrative. I want to challenge it a little bit because as a minority in this country, I have to be very aware of everything that I hear when it comes to minorities and stereotypes. There's a lot of uproar, especially from the white nationalist communities or the conservative communities, about the Pakistani grooming gangs. Let's have a look at it. Whilst we're doing this, whilst it is focused on demographics and some of the kind of the more important factual and evidential issues around sexual exploitation, I also want to look at a very, and I can say this now, when it goes on social media, as always on my channel, people are going to get upset with some of the facts that I will bring. But my facts, or the facts, all of this is from data, not from myself. I haven't created anything. I'm just going to give you information that comes from sources outside of myself. It will be very uncomfortable because some of you will probably fall into the gaps or fall right in place into the information that presents matters of concern. I get that, and it will be offensive because we'll be looking at ourselves, and that's always hard. Let's get into it. So in the UK, the majority of sexual offences and child sex abuse cases are committed by men, with 98% of defendants being male. That's 2015, 2016, it's probably the same across the board. We've always kind of known that. Ethnically, 89% of offenders in child abuse cases were white. So it's pretty much 90% were white, 6% Asian, and 3% black, based on recorded data. Group-based, it's important to know. I'm not a big fan of the London mayor, Sadiq Khan, but he was questioned on this, and rightly so. When someone says grooming gangs, he's like asking for definitions. What do you mean by grooming gangs? Because you're going to see that it was right for him to not fall into the trap of just calling out a particular group of people of a particular ethnicity and then using the word gangs, because black people, myself and people like look like me, when we were young, we could be easily and were easily stereotyped and classed as being in a gang. And black people, when you use the word gang, you're thinking black. That's what happens, especially if you live in London. But there are white gangs too throughout the UK, more so in other parts of the UK, but nobody uses the word gangs. So it's like, we're using the term group-based, and that kind of shows you what's really, really going on. So group-based child sex abuse cases show a similar trend, with 85% of suspects being white. So, it's near 90% still. Victims are predominantly female, the 79%, though underreporting, is quite common. So people don't always say when they're abused. The victims are, predominantly female, especially among boys and minority groups. We tend to not tell people when we've been abused for a number of reasons. Many offences occur within the family environments or involve acquaintances. We also know that about 80% of sexual offences against children happens with people that we know, usually within the family. Recent data on sexual offences in the UK highlights the following. The total sexual offences, this is in March 2023, in the UK, was 195,000, in England and Wales. 195,315 sexual offences were recorded, a slight increase from the previous year. Of these, 35% were rape offences. Arrests in 2023, 2024, 44,283. 44,000 people. 90% of that is men. So pretty much 40,000 people were arrested in the UK, in England and Wales. Wow. 68,000 call it 69,000 of those were rape. Wow. And it's gone up as well by a few. We don't know why. Maybe detection rates are better, reporting rates are better. We don't know. West Yorkshire, let's look at the regions. West Yorkshire had the highest rate of violence and sexual offences in 2024. And the City of London had the lowest. Interesting. Reasons for that? These are things that we want to talk about. Okay. If the discussion stops, detection stops and the atrocities will continue. Let's look at gender. Most perpetrators are male. The victims of this are 20% of them are, or 20% of women in society have been sexually assaulted, and 4% men. So the vast majority are women, who are at 4 or 5 times more. So that's about, every year we're looking at about 85,000 women. 85,000. Big number. 12,000 are men. However, children account for 40% of all sexual offences, with an estimated 1 in 20 children experiencing sexual abuse every year. That's crazy. And you've got people asking for social services to be shut down. That's crazy. Defund the police. That's crazy. Interestingly, we're going to get into it because we're going to look at demographics, okay? Ethnicity and nationality. Foreign nationals are 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for sexual offences than British citizens. That does not mean that they commit more offences. It just means that they're arrested at a higher rate for a number of reasons, and you can talk about those reasons, all right? Today, we won't do too much analysis. So they're 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for sexual offences than British citizens, accounting for 26.1% of such arrests, despite being 9% of the population. So let's look at the whole Pakistani element of this. And I want to be very clear, and I have to be at times. This isn't a dig at any particular group, but every single, in my opinion, every single culture in the world has its own pros and cons, strengths and areas of concern. And in the Pakistani community, I have heard this over the years. There is a culture, but that is not representative of all Pakistanis. That's crazy. We don't think like that. And anyone that doesn't understand how racism works. I don't think like that, but it is something that's come to light. Let's have a look at it. So the characteristics of Pakistani origin groups involved high profile sexual exploitation cases in the UK, such as Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, and other scandals. Ethnicity and background, the perpetrators were predominantly British Pakistani. So they were British, but they had the ethnicity of Pakistani. And they were men, and they often operated in groups. Some inquiries have noted cultural reluctance to report crimes within these communities due to fear of dishonor. So it looks like the culture and possibly religion, I say that a little bit blindly, but sometimes culture and religion kind of intersect. The pressure to not say, and I've worked with South Asian communities, and that is a big issue where they don't want to grass each other up. They'd rather hold that information to themselves. But then I've also found that in white communities as well, and I found it in black communities, and you hear it in the stories of West Indians and Africans. I have interviewed them, and so that feature can create at a high level of unnecessary stereotype. Just most families will have someone in there who doesn't want to say, and I've grown up in it. I know what sexual abuse looks like, and I've heard so many stories. So we can't say that is a Pakistani problem. Another characteristic of the Pakistani groups is that they were targeting vulnerable victims. Okay, now we're going to look at that in more detail at the very end, where I look more at the social work element of it. The victims were primarily white British girls, often from troubled or care home backgrounds. Think about this, because this is nothing new, because it's not, I know for a fact that this isn't just a Pakistani thing, but they saw where the children were vulnerable, these groups. But this is, in my working experience as a social worker and in youth justice, the color or race of someone, the ethnicity is irrelevant. Perpetrators, predators can always see vulnerabilities. They were groomed using alcohol, drugs, and threats to control them. Yeah, I've seen that across all groups. Yeah, and there's an interesting topic here. Authorities hesitated to act due to concerns about being labeled racist. contributing to underreporting and delayed justice. And I've seen that, and I've podcasted on this about 3 years ago, where if there's a demographic that is highly esteemed in society, then social workers will overlook them because they will fear that they will see a problem, but if they report it, they will lose their jobs and be labeled. And you know what happens when you're labeled as a misogynist or racist or homophobe. So let's look at some of the stereotypical elements and which kind of lead to discrimination in society. We're having that a lot. As I said earlier on, the nationalists and the conservatives, I think it's almost, well, yeah, it's a lot of a little bit of some of the other groups, the more liberal groups, will fall into that trap of just stereotyping. Is this a Pakistani problem? While high-profile cases involving British Pakistani men have drawn significant attention, broader data shows that 88% of child sex abuse defendants in England and Wales in 2022 now were white. 88% were white, compared to 7% South Asian and 3% black. And this pretty much aligns with the UK demographic, which means that we're offending at the current rate of which we populate. Now, why are Pakistanis being drawn out? Is it because, and I podcasted on this too, where this is the same issue as to why do judges give black defendants harsher sentences than white defendants when they commit the exact same crimes in the same circumstances? I'm doing an assignment right now on the very topic, and this is a worry because discrimination functions in all levels of society, and we have this thing about Pakistanis, like it doesn't exist in every culture. It does. And this is what happens when we allow narratives to run unchallenged, which is what our journalists are supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be looking out for the truth. They're just running with the wave of sensationalism, and it creates a lot of unsafety in society. And I challenge journalists to do some digging and understand and expose and challenge. The media and public perception and their coverage often racializes grooming gangs. Media coverage often racializes grooming gangs, focusing on South Asian offenders, particularly from Pakistan. And it's led to a perception that grooming gangs are predominantly Asian, when it's not. They're predominantly white. And it's important to note as well, whilst we dig into the numbers, group-based sexual abuse counts for less than 5% of all recorded cases. As sad as it is, group-based sexual offences are a tiny proportion of the general problem, yet it highlights so much in the media, which is a bit of a worry. What it means is that we take our eye off of the ball of what's really going on. There's a lot that's been going on that hasn't been said in the media, and I would have picked it up because I'm looking and I'm saying to people, let's look at the bigger picture. Do not take your eye off the small things, but definitely don't take it off the bigger issue. Where are the majority of perpetrators? So I just want to just conclude on this part of the video. This is part 1, by the way, that our problem is as it has always been, and that is that we are offending at the rate that we are populated, meaning that the majority of offenders are doing it at the rate at which they offend. 88%, 90% of the population is white, and they are committing 88, 90% of the sexual offences. Where is the uproar? That's what I'm saying. I'm saying, everybody's head needs to roll, and justice needs to be served on everybody. But it's not an Asian problem. It's not a black problem. It's not a white problem. It's societal. And in my opinion, you'll find this problem in the vast majority of communities in the world. And I want to add as well, this is how, in my opinion, racism happens. It's when we take a shortcut attitude to a really worrying issue. We're looking at the out group. This is psychology. We're looking at the in group, out group, where we have a problem in society, but them over there, that crew of small, dark-skinned or skin-hued people, let's look at them. They're a problem. That's what happened with black people for after slavery, about 150 years now, 160 years we're hitting now after slavery. That's what happened with them. One tiny speck of a black offender, and the whole group is labeled. That's lazy. That's how racism and stereotypes and discrimination happens. It's a shortcut. It's an uneducated perspective, but you put a little bit of heat on it. So as much as I appreciate that Nigel Farage has stood up for the rights of England, what he has done, which is dangerous, is that he has highlighted an issue that exists in all communities, but focused on just a handful. It's not just him, but he did that to get into his position. He angered people against issues that are not primarily Asian, black, whatever issues. And I've always been frustrated with the issue of immigration, because what politicians don't do, they don't educate on the necessity in a country like this of immigration. They haven't explained and sold it to the people. This is necessary. It always has been. When we look at just after World War II, this country was on its knees economically. We brought people over here. The people are not educated to understand that we need West Indians to support the civil service. Without them, this country wouldn't be where it is now. But we have allowed racism to take place against minorities, made a little bit of noise against it, and it's created a lot of trauma that still exists and is still happening today. And I think that possibly the government is using the wrong people, or institutions are not using the right people to make the right noise and educate as to how we can avoid unnecessary levels of discrimination in society. It's about education, people. I want to go on to part 2 of this video about how and why young girls are so vulnerable when it comes to sexual exploitation.